From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. From the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen is along once again, this time to review his top 10 agricultural law and taxation developments of 2019, what he considers the most impactful court rulings, legislative actions, and regulatory changes affecting farmers and ranchers this past year. Also today, K-State's Bob Weaber will preview the series of K-State Winter Ranch Management Seminars for you cow-calf producers coming up later this month and into February. He'll outline the central themes that'll be discussed at each of the 5 sites around the state. And further ahead with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven, here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Thanks for tuning in. This is Agriculture Today. And for you, during the first part of today's broadcast, an annual feature as the calendar turns over into a new year, a review of the top 10 agricultural law and tax developments, in this case, for the year 2019. Of course, joining us for this is a professor of agricultural law and taxation out of the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, back with us. And Roger, thanks for doing this once again, for you do take some time at year's end to pull together thoughts on those top things that have happened in the ag law and taxation fields. It's hard to whittle this down, but somehow you managed to do so.
Well, it is difficult, Eric, because there are so many areas of life for a farmer or a rancher or an agribusiness or a rural landowner that the law impacts or the tax rules impact that it is very difficult to pare it down just to 10. And so what I'm looking for each year at the end of the year are what I view as the 10 most important developments that would have the most impact on the biggest number of farmers and ranchers across the country.
So, let's launch right into number 10 on the list. The relevance of the Roundup herbicide jury verdicts, and you have maintained that this is just cause for paying attention to the glyphosate court cases. They're very visible, as we all know. Talk about the significance here.
Yeah, this is a big deal. I think there is a temptation out there on many of us, and myself included, at least initially, and that was to pass these jury verdicts off as just wild results of California juries that know nothing about agriculture, know nothing about agricultural production, and that some appellate court down the road will wipe these jury verdicts out. And that was my initial reaction to it, was just kind of to ignore it, and I think probably a lot of farmers' reactions to that. But then I reconsider this, and I think, well, we do need to pay attention to this and think about the possible implications of this litigation and these thousands of cases that involve Roundup that have been filed. What about lease agreements? A lot of farmers and ranchers lease out farmland, they lease out pasture. Go back in and re-examine those lease terms. Do you have to or should you incorporate language in the lease that specifies that the tenant assumes the risks of claims arising from the use of Roundup or products containing glyphosate? What about the check of your comprehensive farm liability policy? This is something new that's come up in the legal system. Does the language in that current insurance policy cover these types of events? What if you hire workers on the farm? Should your arrangements be modified from employer-employee to independent contractor status so if there's a claim that comes up, you're not on the hook as the farm employer? Those are just some of the things, as I think about this a little bit more deeply, that maybe we do need to change some of the language and instruments that we currently have that we're using in our farm or ranch operation.
Irrespective of how these cases may result, how far up the ladder they may go.
Right.
That's number 10 on the list. Number 9, the ability of a farmer to sue for anti-competitive conduct in the production agriculture marketplace. Now, anti-competitiveness is a topic that's been bandied about in agricultural circles for some time now.
Yeah, it is. It has to do with market concentration. And, of course, farmers and ranchers are subject to what we call monopsonistic markets, where they sell into highly concentrated markets. There's not too many buyers for cattle, for example. There's not too many buyers for a lot of types of agricultural products. The price pressure and the squeeze that farmers and ranchers, many are put under when they try to sell their products into these types of highly concentrated anti-competitive markets raises concern. Well, can you sue for anti-competitive conduct? Well, there's a rule that basically says you cannot claim damages when you're not the party that's directly injured. And in other words, if there's an antitrust violation and you can establish that in ag product prices being lower than what a competitive market would produce, you are barred as a farmer or rancher from suing for damages due to a lack of standing, the courts say, because you haven't been directly injured. You're selling to a processor. There's a processor in between you and that endpoint seller. Even though the price pressure comes back down the line and you get a lower price than what a competitive market would indicate, you can't sue. Well, there was a case that the U.S. Supreme Court had in 2019 involved the Apple company. Long story short, the U.S. Supreme Court left the seminal case in place that blocked producers from suing for anti-competitive conduct when they weren't the direct party that was injured. There were some tweaks to that seminal case that the court made. We might see some implications from that, and that may provide an avenue for some new legal arguments in, for example, the Packers and Stockyards Act cases that have been filed in recent years. But basically, that rule that's been in place is still there with only some minor tweaks. That's why it's number 9 on the list.
Number 8, the U.S. Supreme Court once again agreed to hear a case involving groundwater discharges into waters of the United States, coming off of differing rulings at the circuit court level, which took this eventually then to the highest court in the land.
Yeah, notice we're back in the U.S. Supreme Court again. And basically, this is a question as to whether a discharge permit under the Clean Water Act is necessary if the discharge is directly into groundwater, which then finds its way into a water of the United States. Because there is an exemption for groundwater discharges. But what if you have a groundwater discharge and then there's seepage from that groundwater of a defined pollutant under the Clean Water Act into a water of the United States? Do you have to have a permit for that? If so, does that mean that farmland drainage tile is subject to the Clean Water Act, and a farmer that is farming over a field that has drainage tile has to get a discharge permit, which is going to cost 6 figures? It's going to take time to get that. It's going to impact their farming operation. The federal government's never taken that position. But if that's the case, that's a huge issue for agriculture. And as you indicated, in 2018, there were 3 U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that ruled on this particular issue. 2 said yes, 1 said no, and the U.S. Supreme Court in 2019 agreed to hear one of the cases where they said, yeah, you're going to have a permit on this. So we're going to see an opinion on this in 2020. And the case is going to be very important to agriculture because of the ways that a pollutant can be discharged from an initial point and eventually reach a WOTUS. They have not ruled on it yet. So it's going to be a huge issue in 2020 and has a major impact in a lot of agriculture in parts of the country, particularly where there is drainage tile under that land.
An enormous matter for agricultural interests. We'll be watching closely, of course, with your help. Number 7, having to do with regulatory takings, and you characterize this as a major court victory for farmers.
This is a major court victory. And again, we're back at the U.S. Supreme Court. Of course, under the Constitution, anytime property is taken for what's called a public use, and I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, the government is required under the Constitution to provide just compensation for that taking. That's pretty easy to determine that a taking has occurred when it is a physical taking of the property. It's not nearly as easy to determine that when you have a regulatory taking. So when you've got some type of government action that doesn't physically take the property from you, but they regulate your use such that you can't use it the way that you had intended to use it or for the purposes that you purchased it for, the use has been regulated away. And so the argument is, well, that requires compensation also. A lot of times, state and local governments do these types of things, and we had a case from Pennsylvania. It wound its way through the state court system, and they didn't get the relief that they wanted. The Supreme Court took this case, the U.S. Supreme Court took it, and they changed their prior rules on this. And they said, if you're frustrated with the result at the state court, you can file a takings claim in federal court, and it won't be dismissed because the government's infringement on private property is what triggers possible compensation. What that means is you don't have to exhaust all of these potential remedies at the state level and lose before you can get compensation under the federal Constitution. That is a significant win for farmers and ranchers and rural landowners in general that are impacted by state and local regulations concerning land use.
Number 6 on your list, once more. It's a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, but this one on administrative agency deference. Now, this bears explanation, Roger.
Yeah. Deference is a rule that says when you have a government agency that is creating an interpretation of a federal statute, the courts are going to defer. They're going to say that the agency is the expert on this issue, and as long as their determination as to what the applicable statute means is not clearly out of bounds, then the courts are going to uphold what the agency said on that. That's what deference means. Mm-hmm. Well, we had a case, again, made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court on this issue of agency deference, and there was a hope here that the current makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court might change that rule a bit and not give so much deference to federal governmental agencies. They did not do that. So from AG's perspective, while it was hoped that the court would jettison that type of historic deference that's given to federal agencies, that was only a view of the minority of the justices. So I think that is a very big issue. A lot of times, farmers and ranchers all across the country get caught up in administrative disputes with federal government agencies. Very tough to win those disputes because of agency deference that is given. So we didn't get a break on that one.
Well, we've gone through numbers 6 through 10. Roger, stand by if you would. We'll come back and look at numbers 5 through 1 in just a few moments. Roger McEowen is with us, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. We'll return with Roger after this break. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today resumes now. Once more, we're visiting with Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. We're going over Roger's recently compiled Top 10 Agricultural Law and Taxation Developments in 2019. They're posted on the website, by the way, that Roger maintains, and we'll cover that more in just a moment. We went through 6 through 10 during the first part of the broadcast. Now, 5 through 1, Roger. And number 5 on the list, the repeal of the 2015 Waters of the United States rule, and that was also considered a substantial victory for agriculture.
It sure was, and that happened in 2019. And actually, there are two parts to what happened in 2019, and going back into 2018 to catch the first part of it. But you're right, that 2015 WOTUS rule was highly controversial in agriculture. We saw promotional campaigns that said ditch the rule and similar things. What it did was it expanded the federal government's reach over what can potentially be deemed to be a water of the United States, which would require federal discharge permits, and it would have had an impact, a serious impact on a lot of agricultural operations, and not in a good way. Well, late in 2019, in fact, it was October 22 of 2019, the EPA and the Corps of Engineers formally repealed the 2015 WOTUS rule with a new regulation. They published that. It became effective on December 23, 2019, so not even a month ago, and that effectively repeals the Obama administration's 2015 WOTUS rule with those broad set of standards for determining federal jurisdiction over waters of the United States. So where that puts us now is a regulatory definition and guidance that were used to make jurisdictional determinations under the pre-2015 rule. And basically that's tied to a U.S. Supreme Court case back in 2006. So that's where we're at now. The second piece of this is that you've got that rule repealed. Now they want to come in and write a new rule. And on December 11 of 18, the EPA and the Corps proposed a new definition. That was published in the Federal Register on February 14 of 2019. So we've got repeal of the old rule, proposed definition of the new rule, and that's where we're at with respect to this.
So in 2020, will that proposed rule be firmed up, finalized?
That's the plan. 2020, we'll see that finalized.
Very good. On your list, number 4, regulatory changes to the Endangered Species Act. Now, there are several levels of complexities here. Would you boil that down for us?
Sure. And this is a big deal because a lot of endangered and listed species end up on private land. And if they're on private land, then they are heavily regulated, and it really impacts what a landowner can do. I'm sure listeners recall the stories over the years of various types of what seem to be really ridiculous types of situations that have impacted farmers' uses of their property. These issues are really big for private landowners because of the criminal penalties that can come into play if you violate the Endangered Species Act. There were some new rules in July of 2018 that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service issued to modify certain aspects of the Endangered Species Act. And on August 12 of 19, they announced the finalization of the regs. Basically, real quick, what they do is they modify the listing process. Now you can consider economic impacts of a potential listing or delisting or reclassifying of a species. That has to be accounted for now. They also require any critical habitat for a listed species designation to first take into account all areas that a species occupies at the time of listing before considering whether any unoccupied areas are necessary for the survival or the recovery of the species. Very significant changes with respect to the Endangered Species Act. So for those landowners that would have those species on their property or have habitat for those species, you get a relaxation of rules, I think an injection of more common sense application, protect the species, but do it in a reasonable manner that recognizes economic impacts on landowners. That's what these rule changes do.
That's number 4 on the list. Number 3, then, back to the Clean Water Act and irrigation return flows, how those are considered within the framework of that act. The court, well, it clarified the extent to which a special farm exemption applies here, right?
That's right. We're at the Ninth Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. In 1977, the Congress amended the Clean Water Act to exempt return flows from irrigated agriculture as a point source pollutant. What that means is you don't have to have a federal discharge permit under the Clean Water Act for irrigation return flows. They are not considered to be point sources if they are composed entirely of return flows from irrigated agriculture, and that's the key. What happens if the discharges are not entirely composed of return flows from irrigated agriculture? In this Ninth Circuit case, they said that the discharges at issue that included irrigation return flows from activities that were unrelated to crop production were not exempt from the Clean Water Act permit requirement. So entirely in the statutory use of that term meant just that, the court said. As long as your irrigation return flows are entirely from agriculture, then you're exempt. If there's any other type of return flow that's involved in that, then you're not exempt. So this is a very important case that could have a significant impact on irrigation agriculture and those return flows, because in many instances, the farmer's not going to be able to establish that all of the discharges come from agricultural sources. So I would say we need to keep an eye on this one. This one may still be in the list in 2020 because it may end up in the lap of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Important enough to earn number 3 on the list. Number 2, and this, Roger, could well have gone overlooked in all the pre-holiday hubbub. Year-end tax and retirement legislation was passed. Again, a series of involved actions taken here. You might outline what happened.
Yeah, this second one is huge. Right before Christmas, on December 22nd, the president signed various omnibus spending bills. And in one of those, we have massive changes to the retirement rules that are out there. And this is incredibly important. This affects just about everybody. Now we've got an increase in the required minimum distribution age for distributions from a traditional IRA from 70 and a half to the year in which you turn 72. So they moved that up a bit, meaning you don't have to start taking distributions out of your traditional IRA until the year in which you turn 72. That used to be 70 and a half. Part-time employees can contribute to a 401k. They made it easier for small employers to have multi-employer plans. And maybe the biggest change is that the funds in an IRA that a non-spouse inherits could have been withdrawn under the old rules over that beneficiary's life expectancy. That's what we call a stretch IRA. Now those have to come out within 10 years. These are massive changes in the retirement planning realm. People need to be talking to their financial advisors on this one. That's why I put it at number 2. Plus, there were tax extenders in there. There were some repeal of the tax provisions, a few of them that were repealed in Obamacare. Just big-time legislation that came in at the end of the year. And you're right, many people may have missed it.
Do talk with your financial planner. Sort all of that out, for the details are incredibly important to so many producers and others out there, for that matter. And we're around to the top item in your top 10 list. Number 1, qualified business income, final regulations, and the QBI Agricultural Cooperative proposed regulations. Now, all of this stems from the 2017 tax cut legislation over which there was considerable confusion, Roger.
No, you think? Yeah.
So I say.
Yeah, I've spent 2 years talking about that legislation, and we still have lots of questions. And the number one development stems back to this huge 20% deduction for qualified business income for persons that are operating in a form other than a C Corp. We had, as you mentioned, final regulations on the QBI deduction. It answered some of the questions for us as to how rents are to be handled. Are rents business income or are they not business income? What about trading in commodities? They clarified that in a way favorable to agriculture. The whole aggregation issue and self-rents, they clarified that for us. And then when we got into June of 2019, here came the proposed regulations for the QBI deduction for co-ops and patrons of co-ops. And we've got some initial guidance on that. In 2020, we're going to hopefully get the final rules with respect to that. And so we got a lot of clarification on these particular issues, and so we're better able to advise farmers and ranchers and practitioners that have farm and ranch clientele how to effectively utilize this 20% pass-through deduction.
And once more, conversing with your tax advisor in these matters is paramount to producers as these things evolve.
Absolutely critical.
So there's Roger's top 10 agricultural law and tax developments of 2019. And Roger, you've been steadily posting these in pieces, if you will, on your website, correct?
That's right, 2 or 3 at a time, and we're about midway through the list right now.
And they can find descriptives in more detail on these as they come out at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Great review, as always. Roger, we'll talk again in a couple of weeks. Many thanks to you.
Thank you, Rick.
He's a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. That's Roger McEowen. You are listening to Agriculture Today. We'll be back shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Now, to let you cattle producers know about that series of K-State Winter Ranch Management Seminars coming up in the not-too-distant future. At various places around Kansas, these have been extremely well received each winter. And to fill us in on this year's agenda, Bob Weaber. He's a cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension, as you know. And when one says these have been successful, that's being quite truthful here, Bob. These have been extraordinarily well attended and taken in.
Yeah, the meetings have been really well received, and they've kind of transitioned a little bit over time in terms of format. I think when I first got here, maybe we had a kind of the main meeting on campus and used some technology to distribute it out in the country, but kind of recognized the importance of the face-to-face meetings with our producers, and in particular engagement in a component of the meeting called the town hall session. In fact, one year, a few years ago, all we did was a town hall, and we just went and answered questions for a couple hours.
Open forum.
It was hugely popular, and so now we've incorporated that as a key piece in these meetings each year. We try and provide some content related to kind of timely issues our cow-calf producers are facing around the state, but leave it open at the end of the meeting to ask questions to the speakers that were there, or any of the extension specialists on whatever topics burning in your mind. We try and do somewhere between 4 and 6 of these around the state each year, and rely on our partners outstate. The county and district agents host the meetings and do all the legwork to get the site and all the people in the seats. So it's a great partnership.
And as a matter of fact, you've lined up 5 such meetings around the state, and they'll get going the latter part of January and into the month of February. Of course, we'll pass along the dates and locations specifically in just a moment. But in addition to the town hall feature, you have identified several topics that will be addressed at each of these 5.
That's right, Eric. And this year, we're fortunate to have a couple of those speakers from here on campus. One of them will be actually a PhD student, Esther McCabe, actually from down in southwest Kansas originally, has been working as part of her dissertation project on some large auction market data, time series data, and really looking at the value captured from improved production practices. So one of the things our team has identified, obviously, profitability is always a concern for cow-calf producers, and we've sort of recognized, the next few years based on the cattle cycle have been viewed to be maybe a little challenging. And so thinking about ways that we can add value and control costs in the production system to improve profitability, and certainly understanding the things that we do on a day-to-day basis in terms of vaccination and weaning, castration, those things have value in the chain, and we need to make sure we capture those opportunities as we present cattle in the market space.
So Esther has collected information lending to that topic, which she'll be passing along at each of these seminars. You'll also have a couple of optional topics, depending on the location, on forage sampling or handling vaccines.
Right. So the other 2 areas that, and actually our local extension partners will present these 2 topics, one or the other of them at each of the locations. We've had a push amongst our extension group on the cattle side for quite a while about the importance of forage and hay testing. So really understanding the nutrient value in those feedstuffs and providing the appropriate amount of supplementation to get the most value out of that. So really a production efficiency issue. And to go along with that, vaccine and pharmaceuticals represent a substantial input cost for producers, and so appropriate vaccination strategies and handling and storage of those products is really important. If you mishandle them, you might as well, in some cases, pour it out on the ground because it'll have the same effect. So making sure we get a good bang for our buck out of those products is really important.
Good material to cover there as well. And there will be another K-State specialist who will look at pregnancy losses and figuring out what's at the root of those.
Yep. So Dr. Hanselchek from up at the vet school and the vet diagnostic lab will be joining us to talk about understanding pregnancy loss and some strategies for testing when we run into cases periodically that have either a large number of early embryonic losses or late gestational losses losses or calf losses. How do we work with our local veterinarian in sampling and testing to figure out what's the root of the problem so we can make sure and prevent it? Because oftentimes those turn out to be pretty expensive losses from a production side, and sometimes we're hesitant to invest more money into the problem, but really figuring out and doing the diagnostic part can be very helpful to our management position moving forward.
Well, pertinent topics all to be covered at these seminars, plus the aforementioned town hall sessions. Stand by for the locations and the dates for each of these. And they can also check out ksubeef.org for details.
Right, yeah. If you'll just Google K-State Beef or ksubeef.org, there'll be a small registration cost. Each of the events has a meal with it. We've tried to schedule them either kind of lunch and early afternoon or evening programs, depending on location. And so there'll be a meal and a little bit of registration cost to cover that. But we really encourage you to RSVP. The host agents will take care of those RSVPs, and so when you go to either talk to them or through our website, find out those contact locations, you will need to RSVP directly with those host agents. We've asked for those a week before each of the events.
Great opportunity for our cow-calf operators out there to take one of these in. They're well distributed throughout the state, as we'll outline momentarily here. Bob, good luck with these.
Thank you so
very
much,
Eric. Cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Bob Weaber. He'll be on hand, along with several other K-State folk, for the series of 2020 K-State Winter Ranch Management Seminars. And here are the dates and locations. 2 of these will take place on Thursday, January the 30th, at noon at Ulysses, then at 5:30 that afternoon of the 30th at Ashland. Then the next 2 on February the 11th. That's a Tuesday. The first at noon at Plainville, and then the second on the 11th of February at 5:30 in the afternoon at Mankato. And the series concludes with a gathering at Yates Center on Thursday, February the 27th, with a 5:30 start time there. Contact those host extension offices in Grant, Clark, Rooks, Jewell, and Woodson counties to register for the Winter Ranch Management Seminar nearest you, and do so no later than 7 days ahead of those respective event dates. Great program. Cow-calf producers, be sure to take one of these in. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. After this final break, this week's Stop, Look, and Listen. This is the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
The music has faded, as have the lights and decorations.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
1 full week of 2020 has gone by already. It's amazing. The holiday season, with all its celebrations, starting with Thanksgiving, then Christmas, with its expectations, and ending with the New Year's beginning. To me, these weeks and celebrations have always been special, especially when I was a teenager. I sensed the special feeling those dark days had. The dark days of Christmas I remember clearer than my birthdays. Of course, the fact that there was the Christmas holiday, free from school, were very special to me. I enjoyed being away on the farm in the country. There are only 2 birthdays which really clearly stand out to me. Oh, of course, I had many happy birthdays, still do. But I seem to remember more details of Christmas celebrations. But I do remember 2 birthdays because of special gifts. The first one is my 13th birthday after the liberation of World War II. I've shared with you that we were liberated April 3, 4, and 5. after very heavy fighting by the Canadians, who, after 3 days, overwhelmed the German defense. My family walked out April 4, 1945, leaving everything behind. We walked through the lines while farms burned behind us. We walked for a couple of hours until we reached a town where friends lived who had been liberated without a fight. There it was organized chaos of army equipment, trucks, tanks, jeeps, and much more. There was an army hospital. Chaos is what I remember. Then I remember that as I walked a few days later through all this chaos, I ran into my dad, who called me over and said, "Gustav, happy birthday." And he handed me a book he knew I would love. It was April 17th, 1945. The title of the Dutch book is Achterhoekse Schetsen by Herman van Velzen. I wished I could ask my dad where he found this book. It's printed on the typical coarse paper produced during the war. Over the years I've read and reread the stories. I've read it in the train going to college in Australia. I know because I scribbled in the date and time. Here it is. Campbelltown Station, May 8, 1954, 7:13 p.m. Waiting on the train back to Hawkesbury College. Close to it on the same page, 1/1/2018, Manhattan. Good fire burning. This book is full of quotes, notes, etc., written in to remember the moments of the years. And many years have gone by, but I remember. And it is remembering the lingering of the season that I find special, and I wonder how many of us feel the same before we all fall back in our daily busy routine. I listened to a sermon on Christmas where the minister spoke of the celebration. It came to pass. I love that expression. It is already a few weeks ago that it came to pass. The music has faded, as have the lights and decorations. Everything has been stored, and the Christmas tree is taken out, or heaven forbid, folded up and placed back in the box. When I walked the farm with my older son a few days ago, we came by the patch where I had cut our cedar tree to be the Christmas tree. As we walked, Guido reminded me that many years ago he and I had built the new boundary fence, and the weather had been just as pleasant as our present farm walk was. But then, after we got the job finished, also at Christmas time, it had turned bitterly cold. The other birthday which stands out to me is when I turned 60 years old, and my daughter presented me a beautiful embroidered painting like the picture of old Amsterdam as seen from the harbor, a scene of 1650. She worked several years on it, and the stitches are very small. From a distance it indeed looks like a painting, and being Amsterdam at its time of glory, it is special. The sailing ships are in the harbor or arriving from the sea, which is now IJssel Lake, which had partly been pumped dry, and, with the help of dikes, turned into rich agricultural land. Those two birthdays stand out to me, but otherwise I've experienced the holiday season as much more special, as the lights, the tree, and sharing of family and friends had much to do with it, as well as the celebration with songs and special music. And then, a week ago, the new year with all its fanfare and hopes and dreams. I'm fully ready for the new year, 2020. However, I admit I was not willing to let go too quickly of the special feelings. I wanted it to last a little longer. On New Year's Eve, I walked a trail here on the hill, and walking the lower trail through the trees, mostly trimmed cedars, I watched the sunset behind the far hills from where I stood. It was exactly 5 p.m., which would make it midnight in Amsterdam. It's 7 hours time difference. I stood there and watched the deep orange glow of the last sunset of 2019 slip behind the hills, the Flint Hills. I hope that this year, 2020, will be a good year. I'm sure we will have to work hard at it, but that's okay. Happy New Year to all of you.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And that is our time for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be right back here this same time tomorrow. Hope you'll rejoin us then. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.